All right, so we are back in Ecclesiastes again today, and Lord willing, the plan is to work through chapters 5 and 6. And he's going to start out here, we're just going to jump right into the text because I think a lot of review is going to be baked in. But he's going to start out explaining that we need to be careful to have the right attitude when we come before God. So start out reading verses 1 through 7 here. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few. A dream comes when there are many cares, and many words mark the speech of a fool. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not protest to the temple messenger, my vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words are meaningless, therefore fear God. So as we work through these verses here that we just read, we've got to remember the dispensation when this was written in. Because back in those days, going to the house of God to make a sacrifice, that was serious business. And Solomon says this needs to be done with the right attitude. And he says, don't be like the fool who doesn't even know when they're doing wrong. He also says to be careful what you say to God when you do pray. He says, don't be quick to make vows to God that you're not planning to follow through on, because there will be consequences for that. And when you are talking to God, he says, don't just yak on and on foolishly like some people are inclined to do. And of course, like we always say, this was something written for a specific people at a specific time, not specifically to us. But there's usually a point of application for us that's pretty much the exact same thing as the original message. And here it's very, very similar, of course, but we just have to adjust kind of for the dispensation that we're in. So yes, we need to take coming to church seriously, but we have the luxury of being able to approach God anytime we want to, wherever we want to. And that's one of the big blessings of the church age that we often take for granted. But still, even though we have the ability to come before God whenever and wherever we want to, we still need to make sure that before we do that, we do so with the right attitude. We have to remember that God is God and we are not. And we also have to remember that if there is some problem, it's our problem. It's not God's problem. God doesn't have a problem. And so I think we need to keep these things in mind. And also his warning about letting your words be few. I know this has come up before, and I've talked to more than one of you about that. I don't think this is Solomon or anywhere else in the Bible when it says something like this. I don't think it's a call for us to cut our prayers short or to pray less. I think elsewhere in the Bible it's very, very clear, if you have a lot to pray about, then by all means pray a lot. But instead, if you're confused about what to pray about, that's okay. You can pray about that. Right? There is nothing wrong with telling God that you're not sure how to address the situation, or you're not sure what to pray about, and ask him for wisdom to do that. Ask him for wisdom to help you to be able to pray better for it, because you want to get this right in his eyes. There is nothing wrong with that. That's a good prayer. God is going to answer that. And that is a lesson straight out of James chapter 1, verse 5 that we spent a fair amount of time going over recently. So again, Solomon's not saying stop praying so much. I think he's saying don't try to obfuscate a situation with a bunch of foolish words. And we all know people who do this from time to time. Somebody will do something wrong, it gets noticed, and then if it starts getting addressed, that person, it's almost as if they feel if they can spit out enough words, they'll be able to talk completely around the situation and the problem goes away. And that strategy works sometimes with people, but that strategy never works with God. Solomon says a fool does things like that, and the Bible doesn't reflect kindly about fools. Verses 8 and 9, if you see the poor oppressed in a district, and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things, for one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. Now this is interesting because this passage, these few verses here, verses 8 and 9, these are the hardest verses to translate in the entire book of Ecclesiastes. And if you're following along in a different translation, that's probably apparent to you because your translation might have looked quite a bit different than what I just read. If we have time, we might at the midweek dive more into these different possible translations and why and all of that. But regardless of precisely how you translate this word for word, the main point is absolutely clear, and this rings through regardless of which translation you're looking at. Solomon is telling us something we already know. There is in our government, in this world, under the sun, there is a hierarchy of power. There are district officials that he mentions, and he talks about them oppressing the poor and denying justice. This is a common thing in the world, right? And a lot of times what would happen is those district officials, your local officials, would be required to collect a certain amount of taxes, and so they would collect that plus some more to line their own pockets. There was other general corruption, and if you remember from last week, this was a big thing that he was addressing. Chapter 4, verse 1, he said, "Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they had no comforter. Power was on the side of the oppressors, and they had no comforter." And so Solomon's kind of tapping back into that here in verses 8 and 9 of chapter 5, and he's reminding us that the governmental structure is not flat, right? It's not a flat entity. So he's pointing out that, there's these corrupt local officials who are lining their pockets and doing other bad things. But he's saying, hey, those guys, those local corrupt officials, they have bosses too, right? They report to some people, and those bosses are doing the same thing. They're also skimming a little off the top. They also are mired in corruption, and those people have bosses, and those people do, and on you go until you get to the king himself. And Solomon says the king even is benefiting from all of this. And so Solomon tells us, don't be surprised when you see such things. What else would you expect when you have all of these sinful people running things? But there's light at the end of the tunnel with all of this. Solomon implies, although he doesn't point out specifically here, but the implication works throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. Yes, each of these corrupt government officials in the example here have a boss over them, and they're perpetuating this process. But the king, it goes all the way to the top, Solomon says. The king also, though, has someone who is above him. And that's God. Right? And we know God's not in on any of these wicked schemes. God uses the plans of wicked people, and he does use those things for his own glory. We've been talking about that, and to make his plans happen, but God is not the one who makes those things happen. And remember what he said last week in chapter 4, verse 17, there will be judgment for all of these things. And so Solomon is saying here, when you see stuff like this, don't be surprised. This is just people acting like people, right? Shouldn't be surprised. And he says, and don't worry, they will answer for all of this stuff in a time yet to come. And then he gives us this great perspective about the true value of this wealth that's being exploited anyway. That's verses 10 through 12. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? So he's pointing out here, this problem that we all know so well and he's touched on before, when accumulating the wealth becomes the thing, you never have enough, right? Never satisfied. When you have some, you want more. When you have a lot, you want more. It's never satisfied. And then he says in verse 11, along with the extra wealth come more problems, right? He says there's going to be these hangers-on. When you accumulate enough wealth, there's going to suddenly be people around you who are around you because you have the wealth, and they've got an angle with this or an angle with that. And then he says, really, the only value, the only benefit to all this wealth that's laying around is just so it can sit around and you can look at it. What good is that? Verse 12, the sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat a little or much, but as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. So here he's continuing on with the thought, and we've got this contrast of wealth bringing with it its own set of problems versus not having the wealth. And he says for a normal person who goes about laboring at a job, he says that guy gets up, he goes about his work. At the end of the day, he comes home and is going to sleep very soundly. Tomorrow is a new day. But to the wealthy person, it's not that way. So much time and effort has gone into accumulating all of this wealth, and there it sits, but you have all these people around you that maybe you can trust or maybe you can't, and the investments may pay off and they may not. And so they're not able to get a good night's sleep because they're up late worrying about protecting their money and what happens if it all goes away. And so now Solomon is going to argue that toiling to accumulate wealth may result in misery. Verses 13 through 17, I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through misfortune, so that when they have children, there is nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that their hands can, or that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart, and what do they gain, since they toil for the wind? All their days they eat in darkness, with great frustration, affliction, and anger. So here, Solomon is making another point about the futility of toil by showing just how transitory wealth really is, and how the pursuit of accumulating wealth really only brings about misery at the end of the day. Solomon says, for the one who goes to great effort to accumulate wealth, when that's their life, either the wealth being accumulated sinfully or accumulated and then lost through some misfortune, he says, he calls these in the NIV a grievous evil. You could also translate this condition as a depressing misfortune, Solomon is saying this is. Translated word for word in the Hebrew, literally, he says, it is a sick evil. That's what he calls this accumulation of wealth, either accumulated incorrectly or accumulated and lost. He says all that carefully hoarded wealth goes away. And in our example here, or what he's talking about, there's nothing left for that person to give his children. And so we put together what Solomon is saying here, and he's saying that to focus your life only on gaining wealth, only to then lose it, is a terribly depressing misfortune. It is a sick evil. And so once again, Solomon tells us that everything under the sun is meaningless. And once again, he follows up this point by stating what is enjoyable. Verse 18. This is what I have observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. So he starts out saying what he said several times before in previous chapters. This is what I have observed to be good. And if we're going to dive a little deeper today, we can look at this Hebrew word for good. The word in Hebrew is tob, and it's very well translated here. Tob means good, merry, pleasant, desirable. And tob, good, here in verse 18, this is literally the antonym of the evil mentioned back in verse 16, where he said this too is a grievous evil. That word evil in the Hebrew is ra. So Tob is the antonym of Ra, good antonym of evil. As everyone comes, so they depart, and what do they gain since they toil for the wind? So this is his whole meaningless argument, the futility of life under the sun, the futility of life without God. And verse 16, and in other places, he calls this situation, life without God, toiling away under the sun, he calls it evil. He calls it Ra. And so here in verse 18, and the other times that he's used the same argument, he says, life under the sun is evil, life under the sun is Ra. Here is what is Tob. Here is what is good. Here is the opposite of living like that. He says that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. So, life under the sun, that's evil. Life under the sun is Ra. But what is Tob? What is good is finding enjoyment from God, right? And interestingly enough, this word Tob, this is what started off everything in the book of Ecclesiastes. This is what started off that journey that Solomon embarked on by trying to find meaning and happiness under the sun, to try to find apart from God, when he went down those three paths of accumulating wisdom, wealth, and pleasure. It says he did that looking for good. He searched everything under the sun for Tob. But then he said, when I did that, when I searched everything under the sun looking for Tob, all I found was Ra. All I found was evil. And he concluded that the only way that man, woman will ever find Tob is with God. And I think we've been getting that, right? I think that's been coming out in what Solomon has been saying here up until now. But it's plain as day in the Hebrew. It's so much more clear in the original language. Verses 19 and 20. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and to be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. So this is it really. This is the secret to life right here that Solomon tells us. This is where Solomon observed, or what Solomon observed to be Tob, what he observed to be good. He said, eat, drink, and find satisfaction in your toilsome labor. All of the things that we have, right? All of our possessions, all of those things, all these things are from God. And better yet, he tells us our ability to enjoy these things, that comes from God too. But don't miss his point. Getting stuff and being able to enjoy that stuff, both of those come from God, but those are two separate gifts. Those are two completely different things. Both are from God. And what Solomon is telling us, if you become a Christian, this is your inheritance. Right? The ability to enjoy these things. That was last week's lesson. We spent most of a whole Sunday talking about this. And so we reflect on that and look at the other side of it, and we can see what Solomon is saying here is that apart from God, under the sun, a person can accumulate even vast amounts of wealth. God will let a person do that. In God's permissive will, he will even allow a person to do that even when that person never even acknowledges him. Right? He's going to allow people to do that, but he won't let that person truly enjoy it. Not for any length of time anyway. And so Solomon says this pursuit is Ra, this pursuit is evil. But put your faith in Christ, and God will both give you things, and God will give you the ability to enjoy those things. And Solomon says this is a gift of God to his children. And he tells us right here in verse 20 that those who have accepted this gift, those people rarely sit around dwelling on the glory days of the past, because God, he says, keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. So you think about what he's telling us here. If you choose to live your life under the sun, right? Choose to live your life apart from God, then by your mid-40s, I would estimate Solomon is telling us, by about your mid-40s, you're going to be reduced to a life of miserable toil, looking back fondly of how you once scored 4 touchdowns in a single game for Polk High School at the city finals in 1966. And you'll ultimately be miserable, and that is as good as life will ever get for you. But turn to Christ. In the good old days of your past, they're still going to be there, but you won't need to live there in your mind. Because the gift of God, the tobe from God, your heritage from God, your inheritance, Solomon says, is to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in your toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life that God has given you. Chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on mankind. God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honor, so that they lack nothing their hearts desire, but God does not grant them the ability to enjoy evil. So here we're reinforcing what it said at the end of chapter 5. God is the one who distributes wealth, and he gives out that wealth to believer and unbeliever alike, all according to his plans and purposes. And as he noted before, the unbeliever, although he might get wealth from God, he's not capable of enjoying that wealth, because remember, that is a gift from God too, and it's separate. And listen, this is not cruel. This is actually very practical, the way God arranged all of this stuff. If God only gave out both things to believers, everybody would decide to follow him for the wrong reasons. I want the stuff. I want the possessions. Right? But instead, God gives out the possessions to everyone, but he reserves the ability to be able to enjoy those things for his believers, not because he's trying to be mean, but because he's trying to get people's attention and get people to turn to him. Right? Because if you think about it, if God allowed people who are selfishly accumulating wealth, not looking at God, to love and be satisfied and happy with their toil, then they would chase after that toil for the rest of their lives and never give a second thought to the Lord. But God withholds that judgment from everyone except as a gift for those who choose to follow him. So we will remember to follow him. Verses 1 and 2, Solomon tells us there's going to be situations like that where God hands out the wealth and the person doesn't enjoy it. And he says this too is meaningless, a grievous evil. Verses 3 through 6, a man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive a proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. It comes without meaning, it departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. Though it never saw the sun or knew anything, it has more rest than does that man. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice over but fails to enjoy his prosperity, do not all go to the same place. So yet again, we see Solomon making the same type of argument that he has so many times before. It's nuanced a little bit different here, but his continuity still remains pretty strong. The meaninglessness of life under the sun. And this time, we see a man who is very wealthy in the eyes of the world. And remember, we got to get into the mindset of the culture of the original audience to properly understand this. He says that this person, our notional person here, has 100 children. According to Jewish tradition, children are a blessing, and the thought is, well, children are a blessing, therefore the more children you have, the more blessed you are. And that's a Jewish cultural thing. Practically speaking, reflecting on this, I love my 4 children to death, absolutely, but the idea of multiplying that by 25, I'm just gonna leave it at that. But again, the original audience, right? Having children is a blessing. Having more children is more of a blessing. So 100 children, this man is blessed, right? This man is as wealthy as a person could hope to be from a family perspective. And again, in the example, it says that he's living a very long life. And again, this is considered a blessing in Jewish culture. Oldest person in the Bible, pretty sure that was Methuselah. 969 years, I think. If you found somebody older, let me know. I'm pretty sure nobody in the Bible ever breaks 1,000. If that happened, it's not written in this book as far as I know. And so our example here, this notional man that Solomon brings up, the 100-year-old, or excuse me, man with 100 children, is saying that he's lived 2,000 years. And so he's using hyperbole to stress this, right? The man's lived for 2,000 years and he has 100 children. And so Solomon says, in the eyes of the world, you could never even hope to have all of that. But that must be that guy must be very, very happy. But Solomon says, even a guy like that, if he's not given the ability to enjoy all of these things, his whole life is absolutely meaningless. And he says, really, it would be better to be a stillborn child than to be that man. Because a stillborn child is just as dead as this man is eventually going to become, and the child didn't have to go through all of that toil and suffering for 2,000 years under the sun, only to not enjoy the fruits of his labor. And so again, Solomon tells us life under the sun is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And listen, he keeps telling us the same thing, albeit with different nuances each time, but his point bears repeating because we as people tend not to listen to Solomon. We tend to not listen to a lot of the stuff in this book, but this lesson especially that Solomon is teaching us, we really have a challenge with this. And so Solomon has to keep telling us this so we can get it through our thick heads, chasing after all of these things that comes naturally to do. Right? Comes natural for us to chase all of these things. Solomon tells us that leads us nowhere. Stop trying to recreate Solomon's experiments from chapters 1 and 2. It didn't get him anywhere. It's not going to get you anywhere either. Verse 7, everyone's toil is for their mouth, yet their appetite is never satisfied. So this is kind of the crux of the issue, man, trying to find something eternal in that machine of nature that just keeps grinding away and makes sure that everything is temporary. Verses 8 and 9, what advantage have the wise over fools? What do the poor gain by knowing how to conduct themselves before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And so Solomon brings up here, ultimately, the wise person, the poor person, and the fool, they're all in the same boat. Being wise or being poor and knowing how to conduct yourself around others, that's an advantage from a worldly perspective, but ultimately Solomon concludes all of this is meaningless. And so he says the wise person and the poor person and the fool, what they have in common is all three of those people they're all susceptible to the same thing. The wise man, the poor person, and the fool, they all have appetites that can outstrip or can outsize their wallets. Right? This is what comes naturally to us. We always want more and more. He says it's the same with the wise man, the fool, and the poor person. It doesn't really matter. And so Solomon says, because of this, be content with what you have. Don't be constantly longing for more. This constant longing for more, never having enough, Solomon says, is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And I want to pause and note, if you're getting tired of hearing me say that Solomon is saying a chasing after the wind, I think this is the 9th time that he has said that in the text. I am pretty sure this is the last time Solomon is going to use that phrase in Ecclesiastes. All right, we are at the halfway point roughly of the book, and I think this phrase is a great way to close out this section because it pretty much sums up everything that Solomon has been talking about so far. So now we're moving on to the second half of the book here, and Solomon is going to shift his argument a little bit. The first half was all about how life under the sun was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And now the second half of the book, it's going to focus a little bit more practically on how to live. But don't worry, because he is still going to continue teaching us through constant phrase repetition. If you are playing Ecclesiastes bingo, and I have heard that some of you are, and You haven't yet won yet with the phrase of chasing after the wind. Don't fret if you have some bingo squares that say does not or cannot know, or does not or cannot discover. If you have open bingo squares that have any of these phrases in there, get ready, because you are going to be busy marking your scorecard as we finish out the book here. Verses 10 and 11. Whatever exists has already been named, and what humanity is has been known. No one can contend with someone who is stronger. The more the words, the less the meaning, and how does that profit anyone? Solomon here talks about and shows us the limits of worldly wisdom. He says everything that exists has been named, and everything has been known. And he's pointing out here how God knows everything, and God has already appointed everything. And in verse 11, he's saying that there's really no point in arguing with God about any of it, because God is perfect and we are not. God is infinite and we are not. God is omniscient and we are not. Moreover, verse 12, for who knows what is good for a person in life during the few and meaningless days they pass through like a shadow? Who can tell them what will happen under the sun after they are gone? Solomon reminds us, you and I, we don't know what's best for us, nor do we know what the future holds. The truth is, under the sun, you, me, all of us, we stand ignorant of our place in God's future plans. And again, through that, because of that, we see the futility of life under the sun. For who knows what is good for a person in life during the few and meaningless days they pass through like a shadow? Who can tell them what will happen under the sun after they are gone? As people, we are so limited. We think we know everything. We think we're really, really important. And Solomon points out that all of that is simply not true. All of our toil under the sun is meaningless because we cannot begin to fathom God's plans from beginning to end. But I think verse 12 is especially great here because it really makes two different points at the same time. As we've already seen, it kind of calls us out, right? It humbles us. Who are we? We pass through this life, our few days, but a shadow. Verse 12 shows us the futility of life under the sun, but it also shows us the alternative. Let's look at that again. For who knows what is good for a person in life during the few and meaningless days they pass through like a shadow? Who can tell them what will happen under the sun after they are gone? Who knows these things? Who can tell these things? It's not us. It's God. God knows these things. God tells us these things. And that, my friends, is why life under the sun without Him is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. But with God, it is so, so much more. We'll put a pin in it here. Lord willing, we'll meet together next week, and we'll pick up the story again in in chapter 7. Would you bow with me in prayer? Dear Heavenly Lord, again, we thank you very much for letting us be here. Thank you for recording Solomon's reflections over all the things that you did in his life. And Lord, we thank you for all of this wisdom that is contained in these pages. And I pray, God, that you would give us wisdom from these things. Help us to be able to learn from his mistakes and from his conclusions and how you have providentially guided all of this, Lord. Help us to be able to learn things the easy way and not the hard way. And I just pray, Lord, that you would help us to be able to integrate these lessons into our lives, that we might become better children to you. We thank you so much for our church family. Thank you for this place and letting us be able to freely gather to worship you and giving us abundant resources to be able to do that. Lord, we ask that you would please get us home safely. Please bring us back together soon so we can do this again. We love you very much. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.